Welcome to Rev Up Your Potential with Hilda Gann, the stories about entrepreneurs, business leaders, and HR professionals and their successes and struggles along their journey. In this podcast, we also discuss the HR challenges that people face and the tips and strategies that have helped them. If you love to learn through storytelling, join us. Today, my guest is Tanya Hewitt, and she is the owner of Beyond Safety Compliance. She is a lifelong learner, and you're in for a treat because she loves to really join the dots together with the knowledge that she accumulates. She loves to share that knowledge, and she really has a passion for helping people create workplaces that are healthier. Welcome, Tanya.
Well, thank you so much, Hilda. I'm very excited to be here. So just a little bit of expansion on what you were talking about. A lot of people will say, well, what is a healthy workplace? What does that even mean? So a lot of workplaces are dominated by the idea of sticking to the numbers and making sure that the financials are done and the quarterly reports are made. And just so as long as that is accomplished, then we're good. And there's so much more to a healthy organization than just the financials.
Yeah, for sure. And I know we're going to get into that. I can hear the passion of that already. And you and I both care about healthy workplaces and companies who really have that balance. You know, it's about the numbers, yes, but it's about the people. And those companies that care about the people and the numbers actually have better numbers, better profits, better sales. And this is founded in many of the statistics, and even some of the leading magazines write about that combination. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got interested in starting in the business, and a little bit about your background.
So my background is probably unconventional, as is most people's background. I have these degrees in physics, and so then I started to work for an employer. And at that employer, I remember very distinctly there was an internship program at the time. And the internships had various courses. And you knew this because at the central elevators, there was what you would see at what I would liken to, I guess when you're driving and you will come across one of these signs that have arrows pointing to different cities and how many kilometers there were to get to those different cities. That's what I saw. So every day for months, I would be walking by this totem pole of the different courses that people could take if you were an intern. I was hired at the age to be an intern, but I wasn't hired in that stream. And it was really jarring to be walking by this totem pole every day of all of the knowledge that I could not accrue because I was not identified in that group. So with that, I realized shortly thereafter that if I wanted to learn things, I would have to take responsibility to do that on my own. I joined a society that was doing talks at lunch hour. And I can remember with great clarity that there was a talk given by people from NAV Canada. So they are the privatized air traffic control people in Canada. And they were talking about runway incursions. So these are things on runways that shouldn't be. Airplanes need to take off on clear runways. And when there's something on the runway, that's a problem. So they were talking about this. And they had talked about some of the issues that they had with runway incursions, which got into issues like leadership and communication and trust and things like this. But they didn't really want to talk about that. They wanted to talk about the laser systems and all of the precision of their laser systems. And I thought, isn't this amazing? They know that the problems are in the humans, the interpersonal relationships with people, but their comfort zone was talking about the technical. And so they ran the talk about talking about the technical. And when I think I had asked a question about some of these other issues, they said, well, we're not here really to talk about that. We're talking about the technical. And it was fascinating to me that they were so much more driven to go over and over the lines of code that drove the lasers and the tolerances on the lasers, when they had hinted at all sorts of organizational problems that were at the interpersonal level, but didn't want to go there when they were, even when they were asked about it. So that then got me to study more about that human side of things when I got my doctorate. So
that's interesting, because I think a lot of people, that's where their comfort zone isn't about talking about those aspects. And yet you, who have 2 degrees in physics, could gravitate to their way of thinking, or to say, this is really interesting. This is where I need to focus on. And that's sort of what I like to do in terms of my passion and interest in helping others, is that so many people rise and become leaders because of their technical abilities and their ability to manage the time and the projects efficiently. But the human side of communicating effectively, of motivating others and building teams, is something they push aside. So that's interesting. So that's how you got involved in human resources, so to speak, or work culture or leadership.
Absolutely, yes. I was fascinated that this seemed to be a place where a lot of more technically oriented people felt very uncomfortable with, and yet tacitly recognized its importance, but felt kind of just lost in knowing how to handle it. So
it's very interesting. It brings to mind, I was a manager in the intensive care at one point in my career. Before HR, it was nursing, and I would find nurses so gravitated to the technology aspect of it, that's probably, and the excitement of being, in an ICU and doing care for patients who are very critically ill. And then yet when a family member would say, I can't live without my dad, is it going to be okay? They're staring still at the technology and say something, 2 words, and then they move on to the technical aspects again of their care. So I thought, okay, fine. I am going to be in a place where I get to hire women and men who are going to be high touch and high tech, so that they can see beyond the person and the machinery, that they can see that that person's a member of a family, and that family is also suffering. You named it beyond safety compliance, which is really interesting. How did that come to be? Because it sounds like there's a connection between this story that you told about in terms of your internship and the word safety is there.
I have been following the path that the whole safety world has been on for the last, I would say 25 years. I haven't been following it for 25 years, but I have been fascinated on just its evolution. A lot of people believe that safety is obvious. Mm-hmm. And we all are talking about the same thing when we say safety. But I have been in front of audiences before saying that if we were to ask you to write down what safety means, there would be as many different answers as there are people in the room. And having said that, there might be a few answers that are along the technical side, having steel-toed boots and hard hats. But there will be others who have been more on this different view of safety, who would be looking at psychological safety and having a welcoming environment and having respecting other people's views, which doesn't typically get into a definition of safety when people first encounter it.
Tell me more about what you define as psychological safety and how you would help organizations build a psychological safety environment.
That's a loaded question, Hilda. So psychological safety, as far as I guess I can attribute it, comes down to a book that was written by Amy Edmondson in, I think, the late 90s, or maybe a little later. It's called The Fearless Organization. There are other organizations out there, Leader Factor being one of a company that I've been following throughout the pandemic, who has held wonderful webinars talking about this topic. And it ranges everything from how people show up in the world and how they feel in terms of being accepted, through to do they feel confident enough to raise concerns when everybody else around them thinks, oh, why bother? Or that's not important, that kind of a thing. So it's not a one size fits all kind of prescription. It's not a checklist kind of implementation, because it really does play on a lot of emotional awareness that people have of how they are impacting others and how others are impacting them, and being able to adjust to circumstances as they evolve.
Yeah, I agree that it can be, different perceptions. I just feel that a lot of people are not as comfortable thinking about and doing and creating this workplace that is psychologically safe. I think they barely touch the tip of the iceberg with it. It's like that analogy I talked about, the nurse who was so uncomfortable talking about, an anxious, awkward conversation that she'd rather deal with the technical issues rather than the psychosocial aspect of the thing. So I think it's particularly difficult during pandemic times for people to really grasp that and to get comfortable creating working relationships that help foster the healthier workplace, keeping in mind the psychological impacts that COVID has given to us.
I might just offer a bit of an anecdote on that. I remember going to a conference, so this has nothing to do with COVID, whereby a conference attendee, she wasn't even presenting. This was just something she had said as an attendee. She was currently pursuing her doctorate and was doing qualitative interviews of military sharpshooters. So these are very highly trained people. They have to be able to react in an instant. They have to be very mindful of where they are pointing any kind of weapon, because they are designed to kill people who are interfering with high profile events. So when a very significant figure does a public announcement, especially if it's outside, it is likely if you look around the tall buildings, you will see some of these people hidden on roofs of buildings, because they are at an instant, if somebody were to jump, a president or a prime minister, are designed to kill. And she said that she talked to these people outside, like she wasn't up on the roof with them, but she talked to them when they were off duty. Mm-hmm. And she got hours of transcripts from them because they were so tensed up in their work life because they were on constant high alert, mm-hmm. that when they were given a chance to offload that, they took advantage of that in huge, she had to cut off their interviews after 4 hours, some of them, because they were just so thankful that somebody was giving them an outlet to be able to unload all of this stuff that they otherwise are assumed to just handle just fine, because they have been trained to do.
We assume people to handle things fine, and sometimes when people ask, they meet with like no comment kind of thing, and it ends the conversation. And then some people are afraid to share because they're afraid of what people will think of them, that they don't have enough stamina, or they can't manage to be all together in terms of the way they think. So wow, what an interesting anecdote. I know when we talked earlier, you talked about a book that inspired you to really get into kind of the HR perspective of life. Share that book with us.
The Stupidity Paradox by Mats Alvesson and Andre Spicer outlines the perils and pitfalls of functional stupidity. They're management professors from the UK and Sweden or Norway. And they collaborated to undertake a 10-year approximate study to look at workplaces. And they looked at all workplaces they could think of, from their own departments in academia, through to hospitals, through to garment sales, through lawyers, through it. They went through almost everything that we would encounter in workplaces, and were able to find traces of functional stupidity almost everywhere. They break it down into different ways of functional stupidity. There are other people who talk about this too. Margaret Heffernan talks about willful blindness in a lot of her work, where people know there's a problem, but for various factors choose not to do anything about it. And that sums up functional stupidity kind of as a whole.
So can you give us some examples? Because I read the summary of the book, and my concept of what functional stupidity was different than what the book is. So if you could give a couple of anecdotes that will help people who are listening to say, what is that? What is that?
Okay, so I'll give you just a few examples that I remember from the book, because I do have a talk that I do on this that tries to present the same information but in a different way. Sometimes organizations have vision and mission statements that are well known, and everybody who works there was able to talk about these things freely, possibly because it's on their login screens when they get to work, or it's on posters that they pass by frequently. They claim that sometimes, well, more than sometimes, you can get organizations who will get involved in activities that really challenge you to understand their mission and vision. The example that they gave that I played on in the talk that I have given is education. So a school board, whose mission was to teach children, give them the best education they can get, kind of thing. And they went to a meeting that they were holding where they were serving lunch, where they had a keynote speaker. So this was probably on a professional development day. And the attention to ceremony, they said, was extraordinary. I mean, you saw the person who was in charge being concerned about who was sitting where and having all of the right plates put out and having the right color of tablecloths and having the right, and having the lighting in the room at a certain level and making sure that the keynote speaker can be heard, make sure that we test the sound and make sure that we have all of can we see the slides? Can you project the slides? Oh, they're not bright enough. We have to. They watched this whole thing and said, if I would be hard pressed to know that their mission is to educate children. The attention to ceremony was so extreme that you lost the whole point of the organization in the first place. So that's one example.
Okay. So that helps. That helps for sure.
Because if you are truly a mission, vision-driven organization, that should be evident in everything you do, in the decisions you make, in how you show up in the world, in how you treat people. It should be evident.
It sounds so basic, and it's certainly something that I talk about, having the mission, vision, and value as the foundation for the growth. Because having that, then it kind of guides the way you do your business operations. So if you're a quality-driven company, like a security-based company, that's going to be a different set of operations, checks and balances. Whereas if you're a hospitality industry, the checks and balances are not as important as the client service, the making people have a great experience. And those will guide those processes. And the same with human resources. The people you hire will be more in line with the alert mode type people for the quality driven versus the customer friendly, passionate type people for the hospitality industry. And then the types of clients that you serve. So all of that, as you say, it's based on mission, vision, and values. And I think sometimes people lose sight of it because they just kind of go onto autopilot and then they forget. And sometimes that's what drives people strategically back and say, is this in line with what we're trying to accomplish, as you say? During COVID, I know that you said that there's been some really good things that happened for you personally and professionally. Do you want to share some of those?
COVID has been unexpected to most, not all, to most, and has wreaked havoc in many people's lives. So I don't want to diminish the people who, there have been a lot of deaths because of this virus. There have been a lot of changes to lifestyle because of this virus. Long COVID is a real thing, and I think that doesn't get enough airplay. So I don't want to diminish any of that because that is real and that has to be acknowledged. The work from home edict that most of the world was placed under was amazing for me, because that meant I had to depend more than I ever have on an online kind of interaction with others. And that opened my world to something I don't think I would ever have experienced had the pandemic and the edict to work from home not happened. So I was, the very first week of the pandemic, because I follow somebody named Susan David, who is very strong on emotional agility and saying no to toxic positivity, a message that I absolutely love. She, and I was on her mailing list, she emailed me saying that she was on a live TED stream that was happening at very first week of the pandemic. I couldn't have planned a better experience had I sat down to do it. I mean, that was just, oh my God, a live TED stream? This is incredible. So I was totally in heaven at noon during that very first week of the pandemic, because I was exposed to TED Talk caliber people live, for a couple of weeks. Shortly thereafter, one of the people that I follow, who lives nowhere close to me, had started these Zoom calls. He did them twice a day, and I couldn't believe my luck. I think during his Zoom calls, I learned more than university courses that I've taken, perhaps degrees that I've earned. I mean, it was incredible. He brought in speakers. He offered papers for us to read and reflect upon. I mean, I can remember being assigned Descartes, and I've never read Descartes before, and having pronounced negatively on Descartes in some of the talks that I've given a source that I was trusting. When I actually read Descartes for the very first time, I realized, oh man, like I didn't know what I was saying before. Like it helped to really reframe a whole lot of the way that I had been thinking up until then. And there were communities that I was joining from all over the world and meeting all sorts of people. It really, really made a profound difference to the way I saw things.
I think that's what COVID has done for all of us. It's being able to discover your passion, or to embrace your passion, or just to get your fill of it. Really, it's been enjoyable, and I see your eyes light up when you talk about that. Let's spend the last few minutes talking about human resources. What would you say is probably the key thing, that message that you want to send to people in terms of HR, to help them be better at what they do for their organizations?
How about I give you a story on that one?
Sure, go ahead.
So I spent my PhD studying interpersonal relationships, studying, specifically incident reporting systems, and how they're used, and how interpersonal relationships really impact how organizations get information. So I was ideally suited for a certain part in my previous organization. I can remember talking to an HR professional when I was going back to my previous employer and being told, oh, well, we have vacancies here. So, I will set up a vacancy for you. They have vacancies on their org chart, so I'll set up an offer letter for you here. And I said, well, hold on a second. Just because there's a vacancy somewhere doesn't mean that the person you have in front of you is a good fit for that vacancy. The vacancy that was offered to me was in environmental protection. And I remember telling this HR individual that it's fine that they have a vacancy and it's fine that they want to be hiring somebody. Putting me in that spot would not only frustrate me because I know nothing about environmental protection. I would be useless, for a long time in that kind of role. Not that I wouldn't learn, but initially it would be a terrible fit. But it would be disastrous for them because they want somebody with some minimum competency in order to be able to be effective in the role. And just because somebody who it was on educational leave and comes back and can be fit into the org chart someplace, that's not a good use of your talent. In HR, try to understand the person in front of you and try to get to know who they are and how they would fit into an organization, regardless of whatever your software is telling you is a vacancy and is the most urgent vacancy in front of, that needs to be filled.
I think that gets back to your original thing about some people are so focused on the process and not on the people. And maybe sometimes some HR are not experienced enough to understand that if you hire somebody just to fit and fill the order, it's going to haunt you. It's going to haunt the organization, the individual, and then your numbers are going to go up. You're going to have people resign, so your retention numbers are low. Your work culture may be kind of impacted by that person that doesn't quite fit, doesn't feel engaged, doesn't feel happy. So it behooves us as HR professionals and as people who are hiring, managers, leaders, to hire for fit. That seems
Absolutely.
So fundamental. And when I talk about my rev up process, and uniqueness is the you. And what we need to do is look at that uniqueness. And what you're saying, Tanya, is the early days, somebody didn't look at your skill sets, your strength, and try to find a place that would be a win-win solution. Right? And it didn't even sound like it was going to be a lose-lose
I think it would be a lose-lose solution. Yes.
And you're astute enough to do that, but sometimes maybe in the early part of some people's careers, they don't get the big picture. And I know that the more seasoned one becomes as an HR professional, the more you see the action reaction. When you're a novice and you don't kind of have that thinking process of what strategically will happen if I do this action, then maybe they learn over the years. But certainly that's probably what happened to you, is that somebody was doing that and really didn't understand the ramifications of just filling the position. Oh, I just hired another person today. Not, oh, I just hired another person, but that's not the right fit. Because they never say that, but that's what probably was actually happening. They hired somebody, but it wasn't the right fit. It wasn't the right fit. What legacy would you want to leave in your life? You've talked so much about your passions, and you want to go beyond safety compliance, and you want to help spread a way of creating healthier workplaces. What would that legacy be for you?
Well, I think the idea of really making a difference to not everyone, because not everybody's open to this kind of stuff, but the ones who are, the ones who really are excited about this kind of stuff and needs a little bit of help in order to get to a better place. If I can actually help a few organizations to get to this better place, then that is totally fulfilling to me, because all we all want to do, Hilda, is to know that our existence counted.
Yeah.
And people want to do that in different ways. I would like to be able to feel that in service to others, in having a real impact in helping people who want the help to be able to get to a place that they probably wouldn't even dream of at the beginning.
They may dream it, but they don't know how to achieve it.
They certainly are having problems in it and learning how to achieve it.
And one of the things that you're sharing is that I would love to work with people who have that dream and who want to achieve it. It's such a gratifying feeling when a person's dreams can be realized. And, you know, it's all about finding that right fit. There are people out there who want to make a healthier workplace. And there are people like yourselves and me that really want to help. So how do people get a hold of you? And if they would love to follow up further and say, I want to know more, Tanya, tell me more how I can do that.
So my platform of choice is LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. So you can find me under Tanya Hewitt on LinkedIn. I have a company page on Beyond Safety Compliance, where most of the content there is on my webinars. So once a month, the third Wednesday of the month, I run a webinar a free webinar to talk about this whole aspect of work. It has gained a following mostly because of the structure. I say to people that you'll notice that there is no Q&A session, because I firmly believe there is more collective intelligence out there amongst you than there would be in asking the presenters questions. I take full advantage of something that is difficult to do in person, Zoom breakout rooms, and people get to network and really delve into a subject into a more meaningful way than you would in just a normal Q&A session. And lastly, I have my own podcast, which is brand new, called Beyond the Minimum. And you shortly will be hearing Hilda on that podcast too.
I love how you say beyond the minimum, because that really does set the bar. Don't settle for minimum. Get beyond that. Really. Yes, we are doing an exchange, because I think we both think alike, and we both have a passion, and we want to share that with people who really want to make a difference in the world. Thank you, Tanya, for joining me today. I really, really appreciated you sharing your passion and wisdom, which is going to help those people who say, yeah, I have a dream and I want to make it happen, so I'm going to connect with these ladies. So thank you very much for coming on.
Well, thank you, Hilda.
So if you enjoyed this session with Tanya, do give her a thumbs up, put a review on, and if you're looking forward to hearing about the stories of others that may help you in your journey as a leader or as an entrepreneur, do subscribe. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for tuning in to Rev Up Your Potential with Hilda Gann. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast on YouTube and Spotify to stay up to date on our latest episodes. For HR tips, news, and strategies, or if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast, visit our website at peoplebrightconsulting.com.